What's up, guys? Welcome back to the coolest new channel in real estate. I am T.L. Robinson with Home Source Realty here in the DFW market, North Texas. What's up? Now, today we're going to be going through one of the newest forms in our library of craziness, the TAR form Addendum Regarding Broker Fees, form TXR 2406, or as Duolingo tells me, 2406. So this one's important. This one is important. This is your money, guys. This right here is your money. So not only are we doing this for our clients, but at the end of the day, we're doing this to make a living, right? That's just the bottom line. And contrary to popular belief, we as agents don't work for free. I know it seems like that sometimes, but we don't. And then I know there are some that's all they care about is money. And it's unfortunate because it reflects on us that, we just want to take care of you, but we also have a job to do. All right. So we don't work for free. And this form is going to ensure that you negotiate your fee into the equation. So learning this form should be at the top of your list. It really should. Okay. Now, so we're going to jump right into this. And what we want to understand here is that this form was provided just at the end of August. I believe when this form went active around the 23rd of August. So this form is new, obviously. That's why we're going over it, right? But what I mean by that is it's new to the library. It's part of the NAR settlement. And this gets back into all the issues and all the changes that have kind of taken real estate and dumped it over on its head, right? So what do you need to know? Well, first, if you want to get paid, you have to include this form in your offer. Because if you don't include this form, even if the listing agent was nice enough to actually negotiate your fee into their fee, if they were nice enough to do that, you still won't get paid because you didn't submit the form negotiating your fee. Okay, so it's important to know here. They're not obligated to tell you what the fee has been as far as what's been set aside, right? They're not obligated to tell you that. You have to negotiate it. That's the whole purpose of this whole nonsense out there anyway. All right, so you must negotiate your pay. Now, contrary to popular belief, this has always been the case. It's always been the case. But apparently, there's some idiots out there that for some reason they started saying, well, by law or the standard is, and that's not the case. It's always been negotiable. Now here we are. All right, so let's look at this form and let's start from the top and go to the bottom. There's some things here that are very common sense. And I know common sense is expensive these days, but I'm going to assume that all of us are doing pretty well off to afford it. Okay, so common sense stuff I'm not going to go over, but I will go through each section line by line. What do I mean by common sense? Well, if you don't put the address at the top, I think you're in the wrong business. Okay, so addendum regarding broker fees. As I said before, as part of your offer, you want to complete this form. Starting at the top, let's roll right on through this. And if you aren't part of the Home Source family, then you haven't heard me say this. I don't just tell you what to put in each box. I will always try to teach you why so that you know what the heck you're doing, right? Cool? We're good with that? So some stuff, again, is self-explanatory. We won't spend time on what you should already know, but we will go through everything else in detail. So the first thing that they have in bold says this: this addendum should not be used with the farm and ranch contract. Don't do it, farm and ranchers. Don't use it. I remember, as I digress, when people were using the appraisal addendum for FHA and VA. Don't do it. It's not for that. Okay, same thing here. This is not for farm and ranch. Now, Section A, addendum controls. If any part of this addendum conflicts with the provision in the contract, this addendum will control. In other words, this addendum will supersede anything regarding your fees that may be in the contract. Cool? So that means this addendum actually has power when it relates to your money. Might want to pay attention to this one. Section B, fees. Cash fees as specified in this addendum will be paid in blank county. Consult your broker to find out what county you should be putting into this section here. Okay? It's that simple. Mr. and Mrs. Broker, what do I need to put here as far as the county? Done. Okay. Section C, listing broker's fees. Seller shall pay listing broker the fees specified in a separate written representation agreement between the seller and listing broker. Listing agents, this is not for you. This is not your fees. You are presenting this to the seller on behalf of the buyer and their representation, because you have a listing agreement that talked about your compensation. This is about the buyer and their buyer's agent and their fee. Okay, so all you need to do is present this to the seller, and don't try to cheap shot it and say, well, I already know what the seller's going to say. No, present it to the seller. And again, you might have a number out there, maybe you discussed. That's one thing, but you are obligated to present this to the seller. All right, section D, other brokers' fees, buyer's agents. This is for you. You're representing the other broker. You are part of the other broker. Pay attention. Other brokers' fees, you, will be paid as specified below, and buyer shall pay any remaining amount due to other broker specified in a separate representation agreement between other broker and buyer. It's a lot to say there. Separate representation agreement. What is that called? What are they saying here? What's a separate representation agreement, class? Huh? Bueller?
Bueller, Bueller, Bueller.
Your buyer's rep is what they're talking about in a separate representation agreement. So it's important that you clearly explain to your buyer that you will try to negotiate your fee first with the seller. If that's what you wish to do, if that's what you and your buyer discuss, your buyer may have already had your fee set aside. You don't know. So having a conversation with your buyer to say, this is what my compensation fee is in this particular instance. And the buyer says, you know what, I've got you covered. Now you could be nice and say, well, I'm going to go and see if I can get that from the seller. I want to minimize your costs. All this is all part of negotiation and conversation. If you've got a great relationship, or if you're starting a great relationship, then it should be an easy conversation. Just saying. But if you're out for money, then I don't know how you're going to do that. Okay? You're going to have a hard time transitioning into this new world of real estate. If the seller decides to pay a portion of whatever fee you discuss with your buyer, then your buyer is on the hook for the difference. If the seller decides to pay all of it, then your buyer's off the hook altogether. Okay? It says, check all that apply. So if we get to D1, what does it say? Listing broker shall pay. The listing broker shall pay. Pay attention to that. You can enter a flat fee here or a percentage of sales price as contained in a separate written compensation agreement between who? The listing broker and who? The other broker. So the listing broker and the buyer's broker may have a separate agreement, probably on TAR Form 2402, which it says here. Specified amount is for information purposes only and does not change compensation specified in that separate written compensation agreement. So in this case here, if you have 2402 already completed, which I believe, don't quote me on this right this second, but I believe that is the compensation between brokers or whatever that, I think that's the form. But if you have that already done, that actually trumps this in terms of, what has been set out. All right. So D2, seller shall pay. Check one box only. Box A, the seller is either going to pay. The seller is either going to pay a flat fee or percentage of sales price as contained in a separate written compensation agreement between listing broker and other broker, such as TAR Form 2401. I got to look up and see what that one is. Specified amount is for information purposes only and does not change compensation specified in that agreement. Or they can choose box B, because that was box A, obviously. They can choose box B, which says that the seller is either going to pay a flat fee or percentage of sales price toward other brokers' fees. Use this option only if there is no separate written compensation agreement between the seller and other broker. This option creates an obligation for the seller. Okay? Now, why are there two options here? That's a great question. Why are there two options? Why is there option 1 or 2? Well, the hope here is this whole change of scenery is eventually going to get away from going through a listing broker with the seller obligations to a buyer's broker. What does that mean? What does that mean, Tio? What Trek would eventually like to see is that the cooperating broker, you, can negotiate directly with the seller as part of your client's offer, and that the seller pay you, the other broker, the cooperating broker, through an agreement versus adding a second set of grubby hands in the cookie jar. So in a perfect world, the listing agent has negotiated their fee to list and find a qualified buyer for the seller, right? Then as a cooperating broker, you have negotiated your fee for bringing a qualified buyer in event the listing agent hasn't found one. Make no mistake, putting a home in MLS is not finding a buyer. Technically, a listing agent is giving a fee to find a buyer for their client. That's what their fee is for. Now, they put it into MLS to advertise it, but advertising is not them actually going and finding. Advertising is putting it out, and then other people find it and come to. That's why you have a buyer's agent, okay? Now, Section E, intermediary broker fees. In addition to any fees seller has agreed to pay listing broker in a separate written representation agreement, seller shall also pay listing broker a flat fee or percentage of sales price. Amounts specified in this paragraph, E, shall be applied toward any fees buyer has agreed to pay listing broker in a separate written rep agreement. Buyer shall pay any remaining amount due to the listing broker specified in a separate written rep agreement. Use this option only if listing broker represents both seller and buyer as intermediary. Texas, not dual agency. Texas does not recognize dual agency. It is intermediary. It seems like it's the same, kind of is, kind of isn't. This option creates a new obligation for the seller. Okay? So if you're in an intermediary status, if you are a consumer watching this, or you are a new agent, intermediary means that the broker is actually representing both sides. The best way to give you an example of that very quickly, if you're listing a home, if the broker is listing a home with an agent, let's say agent John is listing a home through the broker, and then I, agent TL, have a buyer for that home under the same broker, the broker acts as intermediary. The broker is unbiased, unbiased in the process, and they ensure that both sides are representing their client and not acting in tandem with each other for their own benefit. Okay, so the broker is going to stand in the middle of that and make sure that everything is going according to ethics and integrity. Right? Intermediary. That's the way I describe it. Okay. Now, seller and buyer authorize escrow agent to pay listing and other broker at closing in accordance with this addendum or other separate written agreements. Good for them. Good for them, because table funding, that's for winners. That's for you and me. Table funding. Last statement of fact here. This has been truth since day one. Some idiots decided to forget this, and here we are. Brokers' fees are not set by law and are fully negotiable. Interesting. Do any of you guys remember how many times you saw a listing in MLS before this whole change and the BAC said 2% and you were like, 2%, oh my God, I want this, you remember that? But you showed the home anyway, you gave the best service you possibly could, you got your client closed, you took the 2%, right? That's an example of fees being negotiated by the listing broker. It was already being done. I don't know what idiots went out there and said it was law or was standard. It wasn't standard. In fact, if you really paid attention to it, we were one of the only industries out there actually demoting ourselves by negotiating less fees. But that's just how I look at it. So this addendum confirms or creates an obligation for the payment of broker fees. Consult an attorney before signing. Trek rules prohibit real estate brokers and sales agents from giving legal advice. Read this form carefully. Now, Who are they talking to in this paragraph? Is it you? Is it me? Is it the listing agent? No, your client. That's what this paragraph is for. Why? Because you are expected to ensure that your client understands this form. And if they still have questions, then they need to consult an attorney. Now, you're able to explain and interpret this form based off of the information in the form. Just that. You cannot then take the information in this form and start telling your client what the consequences are if they don't honor the form. That is law. You are now giving advice, legal advice. You can only tell what the form means. You can only interpret what each section of the form means. That's what you're trained to do. Anything outside of that, any addition to that form is a practice of law. So they're telling the buyer and the seller, this is what the issue is. If you have issues outside of this form, you have questions outside of this form, you've got to consult an attorney. Read it carefully. The difference between what we are licensed and trained to do and practicing law is just that. I hope that makes sense. So if you notice at the bottom here, look whose signature lines are there and whose are not. Look whose are there and whose are not. Whose signatures are missing here? Yeah, yours and the listing broker. Each broker's, they're not required to sign this form. This form is for the seller and the buyer, the sellers and the buyers. Either one. They are agreeing on how to handle your compensation. Don't just send this to your buyer and not explain it. And then you expect for your buyer to all of a sudden come up with 1.5% of your compensation because you trusted or they trusted you and they didn't read this document. It won't look good in the end. It won't be pretty in the end for you. Take the time to explain this form to them. If you're going to hold them to obligation of whatever you've negotiated in your buyer's rep, and you come to the seller and say, hey, seller, will you pay this? And the seller says no. Your buyer is on the hook for your compensation. Okay, you've got to make sure that that's explained. Okay. If you have other questions on this, I hope this helps. This is really to provide some clarity on this form. It's not a hard form, but there are some things in here that I believe are extremely important because, again, you're talking about representing your buyer to the best of your ability. Your fiduciary responsibility to your buyers to do whatever you can in their benefit as much as possible. But at the end of the day, again, I understand we don't do this for free, and there has to be some compensation there. Somebody's got to help to compensate the one that is representing the other side of the equation, right?
Show me the money!
So, if you have other questions on this, drop them in the chat. You can reach out to us directly at info@homesourcert.com. But that's all I got for this form. I hope this helps. Go out there, be great, choose relationships over compensation, and know that if you take care of people, money typically follows. If you have any other questions, visit us at homesourcert.com, www.homesourcert.com, or you can call us. You can call us 469-985-2030 if you have any questions. If you're looking for a great broker home, we'd love to have you. We train, we teach, we do things we teach things in a practical way, and we teach things that are actually going on in the industry to help you grow your business. All right, I'm out of here for now. See you later. Peace.